Hello and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Lauren Clarke to the show. Lauren Clarke is the CEO and founder of Turn Compost. Turn is a DFW based social enterprise with a vision to change how our urban environment is utilized. Turn works with consumers, businesses, and nonprofits in ways which support sustainable development within our communities. Lauren's experience in culinary school and the Texas A&M Master Gardener program opened her eyes to the whole issue of food waste and how horrible it is in our environment. Lauren, how are you doing today?
Hello, Raj. I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Thank you for being on, Lauren. Lauren, I like to open the show by asking my guest the following question. If you were asked to share something interesting about yourself, what would it be?
Wow, great question. My background ultimately actually growing up was in music. And when I was little, I wanted to be a classical violinist. So, I spent hours and hours a day practicing on my violin. I did get a degree in violin performance, but it's a far distance now from what I'm doing in the environmental sustainability space. But, my core love was actually in music. So I could nerd out for quite a long time talking about symphonic literature and concertos and things like that.
Well, you're the second musician in a row. I published an episode on Tuesday, and the gentleman's up in Toronto, and he's a bass guitarist, I believe. So two musicians in a row.
How about that?
And speaking of violin, there's I think her name's Lindsay Turner. Am I correct? She's a phenomenal violinist. She's in Vegas. She does all kinds of acrobatics while playing the violin. Are you familiar with her?
I'm not, but people have told me about someone like that, and that must be her. Yeah, and my hat's off to her. I cannot even imagine doing that. But, it's just such a mental feat to play, and it is a physical feat as well. But to use the rest of your body like that, I just can't even imagine it. But I'll look that up. Thank you.
Absolutely phenomenal. I'll send you a link offline. So, Lauren, you mentioned environmental. Can you please share with the audience something about your current endeavor that you're working on?
Sure. I am the founder and CEO of Turn. We are a Dallas-Fort Worth-based environmental business that benefits households and businesses while reducing their environmental impact. We have a subscription-based model that not only helps the environment, but it rewards those who join us. And we do that 4 ways, essentially. Turn transports organic waste to those who can responsibly recycle it. We do a bit of composting ourselves. So we actually provide nourishing compost to our members. We do a lot of community education on sustainability practices related to the food cycle. And we've also launched a recent new endeavor where we're offering an online sustainability store to our clients, utilizing things like compostable products and locally sourced food and plant items. So we do a number of things, but Turn is an environmental service and a fairly new company. We've been in May. We'll be here in 2 years. So, we're very new in this space.
So, how have you seen the past 2 years from an interest perspective and a client perspective?
I've learned a great deal from launching this type of business in Dallas-Fort Worth. I'm sure your audience and that DFW is the 4th largest metro area in the United States. And 2 years in a row, it's been the fastest growing metropolitan area. So we have a massive number of people. So, when you're approaching a large environmental idea or a cause, we've been trying to sort of break down our service into as hyper-local of a service as possible and message people where they are. The response has been, I think, tremendous because we're doing something really new, especially with regards to our consumer-facing products. And so I'm very excited and encouraged about the enthusiasm and loyalty that our consumer subscribers have. And, the corporate or commercial side of our business is also rapidly growing. Companies recognize the growing demand for zero waste services, and we are definitely fitting a need by either large corporations or small businesses to help recycle their organic waste. It's sort of the last frontier, if you will, of zero waste, I think.
Can you share a little bit about the community education piece?
Absolutely. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm a mother, and I have 2 kids at home, a 5-year-old and 19-year-old. And I am a firm believer that the ultimate point of what we're doing and the ultimate success that any environmental business will have in the community is about connecting with people, and it's about behavioral change. And so what we actually want to do with Turn is get people to start composting themselves at home. That is the goal, is to create systemic change. So, I teach classes in the community, whether it be neighborhood associations or elementary school garden clubs. Last weekend, I spoke at a local workshop on food equity and poverty with some community garden managers. I'm a huge proponent for education and for making these concepts very, very simple for people to understand. The whole world of sustainability is a wide, complex, industry now. And so it's really important to me as a business leader to find ways to distill these ideas and to connect with people on them.
Sounds really exciting, especially the community aspect and the education piece in the schools. Are you targeting elementary, middle, high schools, colleges? What's your target?
We actually, I would say that we've had more of a reactive strategy in terms of education. We have requests almost daily for classes or come speak at this, engagement. I love actually talking to kids. And I found a way to talk about composting to elementary school kids. But then we get requests for major companies. I spoke about composting at Perkins and Will, and there's, 200 really, really smart architects and engineers in the room. So, you really have to be flexible in how you talk about these things. So we don't really have a target per se on community education at this point. We just are responding to requests that come in the queue.
I almost feel like you need an ambassador program.
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. I'm gonna volunteer my children.
Yeah, I would love that. I mean, ultimately, there need to be disciples, if you will, or ambassadors to start to translate these things in their own words to different communities. So I love that idea.
I totally agree. And the business side of my mind is almost thinking, franchising, but that's another conversation
Okay.
I'm sure we can have later. So, the focus of the show is the why behind what you're doing, Turn, for example, is that you have an opportunity cost to doing this. You could be doing something else. Why? What drove you to launch Turn?
I think that's the ultimate question for anything is why. And I've thought about it long and hard because the work that I'm doing is definitely challenging. Many times I feel like I'm swimming upstream. So I have to constantly reevaluate and assess my why. It came about at a sort of cross-section from myself personally and professionally. The first thing is that I recognized a massive problem, and that was the volume and amount of food waste that is being thrown away, and also the environmental impact that has, which is very, very negative in our environment. So there's an environmental problem at a large scale, but there's also, I think, a cultural and behavioral problem that I see us creating for ourselves in our relationship to food. So that was basically the first sort of aha that I had was the awareness of the problem. The second reason why is I think, I have a background in sort of marketing and consumer behavior, and I think there's a way to make this into a valuable business. We demand services to our doorstep daily. In fact, the last business that I worked on was a healthcare to your doorstep business model. And sort of just thinking strategically about business models, I thought, let's take a stab at this. Why can't we make a delivery model for the environment? So, the second dimension of why I'm doing this is because I think it is a viable business moving forward.
The food waste piece that you mentioned first, was that like an encounter you had, or was it an aha moment sitting somewhere? Where did that come from?
So Since I got married, I was able to start pursuing some passions, some personal passions in cooking and gardening. I became a Dallas County Master Gardener. For those of you in Texas, realize that Texas A&M is our state's cooperative extension program. And I learned so much about sort of plant science and composting and the process of things breaking down. I was also able to go to culinary school, and because I love cooking, I started taking a couple of classes. I ended up getting a culinary degree from a local college called El Centro College. And it was actually at culinary school when we just would throw away gallons and gallons and ultimately tons of food. Did I think about the connection of this could be used for something else, right? Why are we throwing away this food? It's actually a resource. It's a fabulous resource that can be used to create compost. So it was through those intersections of food and gardening and my personal education that I realized the problem, and then that's what led me to start looking at what are we doing in Dallas, at a city level. What are other cities doing about food waste? So that was a sort of the origin of the AHA.
It sounds like a beautiful intersection, master gardener and culinary. Master gardener, what exactly is that?
Yeah, it is. It's a way for everyday people to basically get a certification through Texas A&M that says, you have met a certain number of education hours and volunteer experiences to become a certified Texas Master Gardener. There's actually Master Gardener programs in every state in the 50 states of the U.S. Texas Master Gardener program, I think, is one of the largest. So why it's critically important is because the program teaches you about what to do for horticulture and gardening in our area in Dallas-Fort Worth. We are in USDA Hardiness Zone 8A, which means you shouldn't be planting like banana trees here, right? Those are tropical plants. It's about teaching consumers and everyday people and equipping them with the knowledge to therefore educate others about best practices for plants. So you learn everything from what's our soil type, how can you responsibly use water? What are the right types of plants that you can plant here locally? So it adapts, global horticultural knowledge to our local environment. It's really, really important, actually, from an environmental sustainability perspective.
Sounds really important. Now, with the compost, do you apply that to some of the gardening techniques you use yourself?
Yes, I've actually been composting myself for the past 10 years. When I met my husband, I was living in New York City. I didn't have any space in my apartment. I had a tiny little stove. So gosh, when we got married and I had a real house and like dishwasher and dryer and all those luxuries and a backyard, the first thing I started doing was I'm going to start gardening. And start composting. And basically that evolved to so much trial and error for myself personally on growing food and composting it. I can honestly say that this probably sounds a bit crazy, but I've basically tried every sort of composting technique at home. And right now in my backyard garden, actually, I do have several different ways that I compost. And we could talk about that later or not, don't have to. But yeah, I'm a doer, and I don't like talking about composting unless I've tried something myself. And that's another thing, is being honest with consumers and businesses about sort of the pros and cons of different ways of composting.
I would love to hear about your personal composting, and
Oh,
I think the
really?
audience would too.
Okay.
Absolutely. What kind of devices do you use? What's the best
All
thing to
right.
use?
Well,
Absolutely.
I think I will start with the fact that we have urban chickens. So we live in the middle of Dallas, East Dallas. And one great thing the city has done is allowed residents to have chickens. So a lot of the vegetative food scraps that we produce in our household feeds them. My backyard is actually entirely edible. So we have raised vegetable beds and fruit trees, and everything in my home landscape is used ultimately to go back into those beds. So there's a style of composting called sheet composting or lasagna composting. And the idea is that you're just continually adding this good organic stuff that nature gives us throughout every season back to your vegetable bed. So, we pruned our peach trees. We have an oak tree in the side yard, lots of leaves there. All of that was put back into my vegetable beds. I don't really care how it looks. The rain is breaking it down beautifully. And in the next couple of weeks, when I start planting, I've just basically added a wonderful layer of organic matter to my soil. The other way that I compost is, it's going to sound totally gross, probably to a lot of your readers, but I know you all are in the energy space. There's a lot of cool work being done with a little creature called black soldier fly larvae. And these guys love fatty meats and Mexican food, leftover pepperoni pizza. So all of my sort of meats and dairies and stuff like that I don't want to put straight back out into my vegetable beds, I put in a little pod where the larvae eat them, and then they pupate and they come out and feed my chickens. So I have a sort of circle of life, circular economy going on there.
So let me tell you, you're brilliant, because last year in August, I know it was August, we had 3 calls in a row from overseas. 2 were about cricket farming, and then 1 call came from Indonesia, and we spoke to this expert regarding black soldier flies, BSF. And he was explaining to us how, yes, cricket is a great source of protein, and they're making cricket powder, and they're making cricket bars now. But black soldier flies, the larvae are for chicken feed, and that's what they're using in Indonesia, in these farms in Indonesia. So absolutely on board with what you're saying.
It's amazing. I think they have like 25% more protein than like mealworms, so there's so much cool research being done out there on BSFs as like a way not only to reduce waste, but to provide a food source for animals. The other 2 ways are sort of rather boring, and that's just, I have like a simple chicken wire container where I just stockpile my leaves and extra things throughout that I can, use during the year. So that sort of is an overview of how I compost at home. I think the overall point is that I use everything in my urban environment, in my urban space. I don't waste it. I don't bag it up and put it out in the curb, because I realize that through the process of what I've learned, that these things are resources. They're not trash.
And for everyone in New York that's listening, did you hear peach trees in the backyard?
Yeah.
So what device do you use for composting?
I use my muscles and a pitchfork. I don't have a mechanical device. I like to do the work myself. I do have a thing called a tumbler, and that's something that probably a lot of people use or have been sold at nurseries. And that's just basically a cylindrical device that makes it easier to keep the organic matter in there and turn it. But I don't have any like home biogas systems or any energy reclamation things.
So speaking of the tumbler, if someone is thinking about getting one, is there an odor or a smell from composting?
A common issue with odor is that your pile or your container doesn't have enough air or oxygen. So if you're doing everything sort of correctly, you really shouldn't have an odor. Odor happens with the fact that you don't have enough oxygen, or perhaps you've put the wrong items in there. And I generally recommend to people composting it at home to really not put meats and dairies and oils and fatty foods out in your compost, unless you're using like black soldier fly or bokashi or something, because those meats and dairies can produce an unwanted odor and attract unwanted visitors.
So is this something people can go to your website and learn more about from an education standpoint?
Yes, one thing that we try to do is produce a lot of educational content that we distribute online. We have a blog. We share things on social media. We try to make it fun and interesting. We just did a blog post on vermicomposting, which is composting with worms. And that's a fabulous way to compost at home if you live in an apartment or a small space. So our website is turncompost.com. And we're on social on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And our handle is @turncompost.
I'll put links to all of those in the show notes. So, Lauren, I'd be remiss not to ask, what are your favorite things to grow?
Oh, thank you. That's such a wonderful question. It's sort of like asking somebody, what's your favorite music? um, I've gotten so much joy out of, my backyard sort of being a laboratory space for myself and growing things and trying to grow things and lots of failures. But the process has been so wonderful and so enriching for me. Um, I have a few staples that I've learned over the years work great. In the springtime, I love growing cucumbers, snap peas. I've got some onions and garlic growing right now. I just planted some potatoes. Um, in the summertime, I love plants that can take the heat. And they don't don't require a lot of sort of water and resources. Last year, I had a wonderful time growing amaranth, which is a really beautiful grain. The entire part of the plant is edible. I had so much fun growing that. The peach trees and things like that are wonderful. We've got blackberries going on. I guess I could talk for a long time about what I like to grow.
So, do you talk to your plants?
I don't do that.
It's just me and you on the recording here, so you can tell me
Do
if you
you
do.
really?
I talk to
I've
mine,
heard
so I'll
about
just tell
that.
you straight out.
Tell
I
me,
talk to
tell
my
me what you do. Tell me what you
I
do.
talk to my plants. All right, here we go, revelation time. I have two plants, one that I adopted about 15 years ago, and I'm sure what kind of tree it is. It's some indoor tree. It was left in a house, and someone gave it to me. It was about 1.5 feet tall, and I'm going to refer to her as a she. She's probably 12 feet tall now, and I water her Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, really early in the morning, and I go up to her and I stroke her leaves and I tell her that I love her and I kiss her leaves and I say, you know what? Thank you so much. She's brought me so much joy over the last 15 years since I've had her. That's what
I
I
think
do
that's
with my
lovely.
plant.
I've heard about this, and I know there's science out there about it. I will say that this is sort of tangentially related to what you're saying. And I've just become to understand the whole world of our soil and the universe beneath our feet, and science and research around microbes, and basically even microbial communication. I mean, this is going to sound, I know, way out there. But, some people would say there's evidence that plants are communicating with each other under the ground, through the soil. And I think that's a really fascinating idea.
There's a couple of really interesting TED Talks regarding that, about the roots of trees and how they communicate. And most recently, I heard that there's even conversations now about plants having
Really?
consciousness. So I am so I don't see a reason not to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the camp I fall in, is that, and perhaps a little off topic, but I think to think that we only have consciousness, I have a hard time believing that, when it's been proven that every particle matter has some kind of transmission, some kind of energy that comes off of it. And so I think for me, it's hard to believe that plants aren't talking to each other or communicating with each other.
Wow. I'll have to check that out. Thank you for mentioning that.
I'll share those TED Talks with you. They're really amazing. Some of the work that's going on regarding, especially the roots of trees and how they help each other and adopt each other, and how they even have a
Wow.
preference for their own kind, as far as sending nutrients to their own kind first. So Lauren, I like to wrap the show with, if you could share some advice or words of wisdom with the audience, what would it be?
Yeah, for those of you who haven't composted before and think it sounds like an altogether disgusting idea, I would just want to encourage you by saying it is one of the basic ways that we can help our environment at home, either by recycling your food waste or just by thinking about producing less of it. So source reduction. The second thing is if you're thinking about composting, don't be overwhelmed by it. Start simple. Start with one or two things, whether it be your coffee grinds or your eggshells, and throw them out into your garden. Don't stress out about it. When you start gardening, composting, spending time outside, looking at how plants are growing, thinking about where your food is coming from, connecting to that process, it really is going to change you and only do a lot of good in your life.
I really appreciate that. You mentioned coffee grounds, and I'm a French press guy every morning, so I take my coffee
Oh,
grounds outside and I
wonderful.
pour them into the yard. And my wife always wonders why, and I say, look, I've heard it's good for the ground, so I'm doing it. Um, Going back to earlier in the conversation
Hmm.
regarding actual education piece, you mentioned coffee grounds. If someone were to actively take one or two steps besides coffee grounds, what else could they start doing
Yeah,
from a
I
composting standpoint?
recommend very simple, basic things. You don't need to buy an expensive contraption. Start with, a $10 roll of chicken wire or landscaping material, fencing material. Get some clippers and create some sort of either square or cylindrical structure. I have one in my side yard, and just start saving your leaves there. Leaves, coffee grinds, eggshells. If the whole idea of food waste is sort of intimidating and disgusting, just start with something basic like leaves. Um, that small steps, I think, is what I would recommend.
That is really wonderful. Small, actionable steps. Lauren, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I look forward
Oh,
to
yeah.
coming by
Well,
and
I'd
seeing
love to
your
have you over,
yard one
Raj.
day.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Lauren.